Hello and welcome. If you're just joining us, we'll be getting started in just a few minutes. Okay, it looks like we are at about 50 participants, maybe still climbing. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We're going to get started in a few minutes, but so sit tight. You're in the Finding Frostfish Volunteer Training webinar. We have a very punctual crowd this evening. Before we launch into the content for this next hour, I will just do a brief housekeeping. If you're new to Zoom, you should see at the bottom of your screen a little button that says Q&A. There's also a chat window. We're asking you this evening, if you have questions that come up during the presentation, if you would type them into the Q&A. That way we can keep track as we go along, and we'll have some time dedicated at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Thank you so much for your time. And we're really excited to have this project launch in the days preceding when the fish will actually start running. So super excited to have you all interested and taking the time this evening. I am going to kick us off. We have a good agenda for the next hour. And we're going to start with a presentation by Brett from the Downeast Salmon Federation. He's going to talk to us a little bit about Tomcod or frostfish, why you're all here, and let us know what's so cool about frostfish and why do we need to study them. Then we're going to have Danielle from the Maine Department of Marine Resources talk to us about this quest for tomcod and what it means to volunteer and what you'd be looking for as far as completing the survey. And last but not least, we'll have Riley from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute talk to us about the online platform, which is how we're collecting the data, the Ecosystem Investigation Network, and how to really get started in the process. So my name is Molly Payne-Wynn. I'm the Freshwater Program Director with the Nature Conservancy, and I've been working closely with Riley and Sarah Kern at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, Danielle at the Maine DMR, Brett and Sarah Madrinal at the Downeast Salmon Federation to bring you this project that is community science. And really what it's all about is learning and documenting about our sea-run fish populations in Maine. So this is sort of the inaugural launch of this project coastwide. And so we're really excited that you're here to help us get started and see where this survey goes. It's also a really great opportunity to get outside in some of the colder months and reconnect with our rivers and streams here in Maine. So without further ado, I think I will hand it over to Brett to kick us off.
Thanks, Molly. I'm going to share my screen here, folks, and we'll dive right in. So hi, I'm Brett Ciccatelli. I work with the Downeast Salmon Federation. So we are a regionally based, so Washington County and Hancock County based nonprofit that has been working to restore and protect fisheries and rivers, and primarily river fisheries, since the early 1980s. We're membership based. There's about 12 of us who spend our days doing this work, and we're supported by all kinds of great people across the state and the country and the world. So check us out. You can learn more about us. But today, I'm going to zoom us away from salmon, which is what we spend a lot of time doing, and talk about tomcod. So this page here shows all these fish that lake salmon are what we call diadromous or sea run. They live in the ocean part of their lives, and they live in the rivers for the other part. So tomcod are right here towards the bottom, not to the scale because that tomcod's as big as a sturgeon, but they're just one of a bunch of fish that live in our area and use our rivers and our oceans. So this is who we're talking about. This is a tomcod in the water, a little one. I've also got two here that I'll sort of hold up for scale in my hands. These are two frozen tomcod or thawing tomcod from my freezer that I'll eat for dinner later. So there's a female here and a male for the size. So these are the fish we're talking about, the fish we're going to be looking for in this survey. So what do? Salmon come back and spawn in rivers. They go way upstream. Tomcod don't do that. They tend to be closer to the ocean. They're a nearshore diadromous fish. So they live in the brackish water and then will swim into fresh water to spawn in the winter. And we'll talk more about the sort of site selection later on in this gathering. But I wanted to touch on, we were founded by salmon anglers. So are there tomcod anglers? And do these fish matter to people? Yeah, they're important ecologically. They live in these places and they feed our wildlife, but they also hold a place in a lot of people's hearts and bellies. So this is a tool that was sort of given to me, passed on, I guess you could say, from a man in his 80s in Ellsworth, who grew up catching tomcod for his family. They would go down with a sled and hook tomcod with this little gaff they'd make and bring them home and put them in a snowbank. And then throughout winter, the kids would have to go out and dig in the snowbank or the frozen barrel in the basement and bring in food. So these are important, that's people that we know who still are alive today who grew up with these fish as part of their diet, and there are, still people catching them. But, we weren't the first ones here eating these fish. These fish have been feeding the Wabanaki people for thousands of years and have been important, all the other critters that are fish eaters out there. So when you catch one, thinking back to people, these are representative of what you might pull out of the water to bring home. So there's ice in the ground. There's a female that went on top. She's about 3 or 4 times bigger than that male on the bottom. She and that male are coming up into these brooks in the winter to spawn. So they're coming in. She's laying eggs. There'll be all these males there attending and putting milt out to fertilize those eggs. And the eggs are really sticky and globuled or fall to the bottom of the brook. But you'll see these fish just swimming around. And I'll show you some more of that once we get into the how we find and how we look for these guys. But I wanted to sort of put a little perspective on what we're talking about from a fish. And I know dead fish sometimes are to make people squeamish, but you have to remember these are, a really important and potentially critical part of a sustainable food system. That man in Ellsworth grew up at the end of the Depression, and those fish, I'm sure, helped balance that family's food economy at home. And sustainably and smartly, they still can. The other thing that's great about tomcod and all these species and these types of surveys that we're proposing, where you as a citizen go out and look for fish and sort of document where they are is they can help guide bigger restoration around a resource. So this is a place where historically we had heard there were tomcod. This is a dam that no longer exists, but it's at formerly it was at the head of tide on a small stream in Sullivan. The tide's out right now. If the tide was up, that canoe would be sitting on the ocean. And behind this stone was a little freshwater pond that had at one time, we know, been a smelt and tomcod area. They spawned there, they fed other creatures, people fished for them. This dam was built in the 1960s and killed that run. By doing monitoring, we learned there were still tomcod around. They were still nearby this brook, were behind this dam. They were in adjacent waterways. We had that data provided by citizens to know that there was a reason to focus on this place. If we were going to restore not just tomcod, but all the native, ecological services that little stream used to do. So this little tidal stream used to be a place where fish would spawn, birds would feed, salt marshes grew, tides were able to go up and be absorbed in the woods, and some of that wave energy could be dissipated. Just an important part of our local ecology. So we knew there were tomcod. These little fish sort of led us here, and we knew that we needed to, if we wanted to help those fish address this problem. In this case, the group I work with, we have a land trust, so we bought this property, partnered with a bunch of different regional and statewide players, and brought in the excavators. This is RF Jordan from Ellsworth coming over to remove that dam. So what you're looking at is out into the ocean, so across that dam now. And that drained area used to be a little lake, a little pond, that though it had its own ecological use, it wasn't what belonged there. It wasn't natural. So we took that structure out. So we used the presence of those fish and the knowledge that they belong there to drive this project. And we ended up with now is this is looking down. This is an aerial view of this site. And you can kind of see where the dam used to be. There's a hole, and this next photo will make it clearer. See the ocean coming in. So where those rocks are scattered, that used to be the dam. So the ocean used to stop about a third of the way on this picture from the right. And now it goes all the way up, and it goes way up into the woods. You can't even see where it goes in this picture. But what's most amazing, and I think, is we knew there were tomcod around this place. That's what made us go here and get involved in this project. We knew there were smelt, which are another fish like tomcod, around this place. But they hadn't been inside of this area since before the 1960s. So these were many, 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 many generations descendant of the last tomcod who knew what it was like up there in the woods. The first year after this dam was taken out, the first year the tide was into this area, there were tomcod spawning and looking for spawning beds in that newly sort of restored place. These fish came back, they were there, they were ready to go. The ecological drive was still in the species locally, and we were lucky to have them because we hadn't lost them in the adjacent streams. It's one of the great things about Maine is we have most of our species of sea-run fish still here, even if they are somewhat diminished. So understanding where they are, one, helps us really get a sense of, well, how much more help can we give these different species? But really, it helps us recognize where we have work to do. So these fish, again, they're important still to people's bellies, and they have been in birds' bellies and fish bellies, but they're also really important at helping us understand and guide what we do as a sort of management community, people that are charged with taking care of fishes in the state of Maine. So you're collecting this data, sort of adds another layer of where people become important, and it's you help these fish, even if you end up taking a few and eating them because you find a really productive, healthy run when you're out doing this monitoring. But that's kind of where they are, and what's cool is they come back. So some species like salmon, which I work a lot with, take a lot of work and are have a life history or a lifestyle that makes it harder for them to be restored in 1 or 2 years. Tomcod, they respond pretty quickly. Like I said, these fish were there the next year, and every year we've gone to check, there's been more of them. So at this particular site, so this the payoff is huge with helping these little fishes out, and then they get to play more of a part in our just our wildlife viewing or our diets or whatever it may be. So it's a quick move through Tomcod with a whole lot of biology not covered because I wasn't going to be able to do that today. But if you want to learn some more detailed, there's a great book where those illustrations I showed earlier came from, which is The Fishes of the Gulf of Maine, sort of a seminal guide to Maine fisheries. There's great history and natural history on Tomcod. You can find it online. So check it out, Fishes of the Gulf of Maine, if you want to get sort of deep dive some of the biology around these fishes. But to learn more about the sort of human context, I would say look for the closest 80-year-old to your house and ask them what they know about Tomcod, and you might be surprised. Now I'm going to pass it off. So I think Danielle is our next presenter. So Danielle's with DMR, or let Molly direct us, I guess.
I'll segue us. Thanks, Brett. Well, I just wanted to mention while Danielle queues up her presentation that we've actually had a couple questions come in via email about where tomcod are in the state. And they're not just in Downeast, Maine. So their range actually extends as far as New York, I believe. And so anywhere along the coast is game for finding these fish and documenting them. So really, really cool stuff and some great history there. So thanks for sharing, Brett. Danielle, if you want to take it away and let us know about the quest that we're asking people to undertake.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you, Molly. So I work with the Division of Sea Run Fish and Habitat within DMR. And I know, before I started working here, I tended to think DMR was lobsters and elvers and those ocean things. But our Division of Sea Run Fish and Habitat has the mission to protect, conserve, restore, manage, and enhance diatomaceous fish populations like tomcod, so that we can work and collaborate on restoration projects like the one that Brett showed us today. And we need your help because Maine has a huge coastline. And there are streams up and down the coast that we really need your help to get boots on the ground to help us cover. The survey itself is broken up into two components. There's a nighttime survey where you're going down to the stream to look for those tomcod themselves, or there's a daytime bird survey where you're going down to the same streams, but during the daytime to look for the piscivorous birds, the birds that love to eat tomcod. And you can participate at night or during the day, whichever one you're more comfortable with, or you can even do both. You can go back to your stream day and night to kind of get a sense of both what the birds are doing and see if you can see tomcod as well. When you're preparing to collect data, we'd like you to go out in a team of 2 to 4 people. And the reason for this is, especially when you're going out at night, our stream banks can be a bit slippery when they're covered in ice and snow, because this is a wintertime survey and there is safety in numbers. And you also want to make sure to wear warm winter clothing and appropriate shoes. So this is a photograph from the Sullivan-Sorrento Historical Society. And this is a gentleman out fishing for tomcod, and you can see what the conditions can look like. Now, we don't want you going out on the stream itself, but you can get a sense of how much ice there is on that stream bank. So warm clothing, appropriate shoes, and again, a team. But of course, we live in a COVID world right now. So we want you to remember to heed our current state health warnings. So make sure you're wearing a cloth face covering and practice social distancing. This survey is actually a great family activity. So if you've got some middle school kids at home or some high school kids and you want to go out as a family unit to look for either tomcod or birds, this is a great way to get outside and help collect some really important data for our state and our restoration partners. There are a few materials that you need to have with you to collect the data. You'll need a printed data sheet, which we'll be stepping through in just a minute, and a pencil or pen to collect data. If you're conducting nighttime surveys, you'll need a flashlight. You will also need a camera, a GPS, and a stopwatch, or a smartphone that contains all 3 of those components. There are some other useful things that you may want to have along if you're doing daytime bird surveys. You may want to have a bird guide. We've given a few examples of some that I like here. There are some great bird guide apps that are free for both iOS and Android, as well as some online tools for birds like the Cornell Lab All About Birds. And we can provide you with all of those links after the training as well. So once you're prepared, you're ready to go out into the field and collect the data. So we're going to talk about the trip, where you're going to head down to the stream and write down your observations. I'm actually going to do a demo of the data sheet, and we'll talk through the protocol because we do have a data sheet that has the protocol integrated into it. So again, we have our required materials, your team, your data collecting device, so your notepad, your data sheet and pencil. The first thing you're going to do when you get to the site is you're going to tell us where you are and when. So we need the date of your observation. And then we need
Danielle,
your location. Yes?
We're not seeing your screen.
Oh, I guess I need to stop sharing and then share the new screen.
Try again, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for bearing with us, folks.
Yep. Okay, are you seeing the data sheet now?
There we go. Now
Perfect.
we have it.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so here's our data sheet. Again, the first thing you're going to do is record the date and where you are. We're looking for your latitude and longitude. You can get this either from a GPS or from a smartphone, and the instructions are written out there for you. And then we want to know what the conditions are like. Reminder, don't step in the stream itself. Please stay on the stream bank. And we want you to know what the primary focus of your survey is. Are you out in the day to look for birds, or are you out at night to look for fish? How many people are with you? And what's the weather like? If you're able to give us the air temperature, that's awesome. That is optional. However, we would like it to know if it's clear, if it's cloudy, if there's any precipitation, if it's hazy or foggy, because those things can interfere with our ability to actually see either the fish or the birds. So we want to know what your viewing conditions are like. We also want to know what the tide stage is. Is it low, is it middle, or is it high tide? And then we want to know what it was like getting to the site. So we'd like to know if you know it, the stream name. We definitely want to know the county. If you don't know the stream name, just please write unknown. The county and the GPS should help us identify where you are. But if you do know it, please record the stream name. What was the access like? Did you have to pass over or through any private land? And how easy was it to get to the site? Was it very easy? You could take a small child or an older person down there. Was it moderately easy, or was it challenging? Was it something that you might think twice about scrambling down with a little kid? And we also want to know if there are any obstructions to fish passage. So these could be things like a culvert or a low dam or a roadbed, or they could be natural things like a beaver dam or a natural falls. If you don't see any, you write none observed. And so this is what you can see from your viewing point. So you're going to walk down to the stream, and from where you're standing, you look upstream, you look downstream. Do you see any obstructions? And what are there? If you, from that point, you may know that there's an obstruction way upstream, but if you don't see one from where you're standing, you would circle none observed. And then you can make a note of that in the notes section that you know that 300 yards upstream, there is an obstruction. Is there any sign of fishing activity, yes or no? And then if yes, please record the gear that's being used and any other observations in the field notes. So if you're out in the nighttime looking for tomcod, you would then fill in the next section. So the instructions are for this protocol, for the nighttime protocols, to walk down to the river at night. You want to do this at high tide before daybreak. That's the best time. And tomcod they're pretty cryptic, which means they're hiding. So you're going to want to look in areas of open water. You won't be able to see them under the ice. And so you first need to prepare yourself by standing on the bank facing the river, and you need to let your eyes adjust. So you want to stand and for 5 minutes, letting your eyes adjust and kind of just being still so that any fish you may have startled kind of go back to their normal activity. And then you want to periodically shine your flashlight over the open water looking for fish. If you shine the light continuously, the tomcod are going to swim away. So in order to count the fish, you shine the flashlight into the river and have everyone in your group count the number of tomcod they see in 20 seconds. So this is where the stopwatch comes in. Then compare your counts. If they're hugely different, try it again. If they're close, record the average. So what you're recording in this data field is how many tomcod your group saw. So if you're doing the bird survey, please circle the option we did not survey at night. If you're doing the tomcod survey and you didn't see any tomcod, circle none observed. And then your counts fall into these bins, these 10 kind of counts of 10 bins between 1 to 10 or up to more than 80. So then our daytime observations is we're looking again for bird activity. So what we're looking for is activity by bird species that might tell us that tomcod are present. Not all bird species eat fish, but there are 5 particular categories of birds that we're asking you to look for, and these 5 types of birds do. These are mergansers, loons, gulls, eagles, and cormorants. So the way you're going to do this protocol is to find a spot near a river below the head of tide, but above a bay or ocean environment. And Brett's going to tell us a little bit more about how to find the right spot. You're then going to look for the birds with the naked eye or binoculars, and you're going to watch bird activity for 5 minutes. And again, this is where your stopwatch comes in. So you're also going to be, as you're watching, paying attention to any birds that are actively diving or capturing fish. And it doesn't need to, they don't actually need to catch fish. You don't need to see them catch fish. If they're diving, even if you don't see them catch a fish, that means they're foraging, they're looking for food, whether or not they're successful. So then you're going to fill out the table telling us how many of each bird type that you saw and what they were doing. If you didn't see any birds, you record a 0. If there are other species, then you have a place in the field notes to tell us what you saw. Also, if you see any other animals, other bird species or mammals that appear to be actively foraging the stream, you can also note this in the field notes. So the key question here that you need to answer is, did you see mergansers, loons, gulls, eagles, or cormorants? If you were surveying at night and did not see birds because you were surveying at night, please circle the option we did not survey during the daytime. If you are doing the bird survey and you didn't see any, the option you choose is we looked and didn't see any. If you did see birds, then you circle the option that's yes, 1 or more, and then you tell us how many of each species and what they were doing. So either diving / foraging or sitting on the water or other. And then the other category you can include in the field notes. So other could be, for example, if a bald eagle flies through your study site. You could record that other bald eagle flying past. And if you want to tell us whether it was flying upstream or downstream, that is great as well. And then we do have a required photo to document what you saw. And the reason we have this photograph requirement is because photographs help us document what you're seeing for those of us who aren't there to see it with you. So while you're taking photos at night, you want to use a flash or a flashlight to illuminate the stream. And this photo of the stream or river is required. This can help us to go back to the site. It can help us to, if you're not sure whether you're in the right place, we can take a look at the photograph and help you assess your study site, whether you're in the right place. So that key photograph that we're looking for is a photo of the stream or river. So as you're standing on the stream bank, looking across the stream, that's what you're taking a photo of. If you have the opportunity to take a photo of tomcod, that's great. If you can take photos of birds foraging the stream, that's great as well. But that photo, kind of that cross section, standing on the stream bank, looking from one side to the other, is our required photograph. We then have our field notes section that I've alluded to a few times. This is where we want you to write down any place where you saw something that in the previous parts of the data sheet told you to record in the field notes. This is where you're putting it. If you see anything unusual or anything that interfered with your observation, this is where you want to record it. If, for example, you've been to the site before and have memories that relate to tomcod at this place, we'd love to hear them here. You can also provide a date for them. If you happen to choose a stream that's near your home and you say, oh, hey, I was here last year and I saw birds diving in the stream around Christmas time, that's something we'd love to know as well. And then we want you to certify your work. So you need to certify your work, you need to be able to answer these 3 questions with a yes. 1, did you fill out each field to the best of your ability? 2, did you note any reasons or conditions that prevented you from collecting a certain piece of the data that we've asked for? And did you save photos to upload? And then you sign it. Please print your name, and if you're willing, provide your phone or email so that if we need to contact you after the fact, if we have questions about your observations, we want to know whose data sheet this is. So I'm going to turn it over to Brett to talk a little bit about where you want to, where you're going to be surveying. And then after that, Riley is going to talk a little bit about how you enter the data, because once you've collected the data on these data sheets, we have an exciting data portal for you to enter the data in electronically to transmit it to us.
Hey, everybody. So I'm back. And if you can see here, so where do you go look for these fish? If you can see Keith here, so this is the fellow who took that picture we saw earlier of that Tomcod underwater. He's doing one way. He's showing us a way that's not really what we're asking of you in this survey, but he's out with a dry suit and a snorkel looking for Tomcod to photograph. So we don't want you to get that serious, but the point is you got to know where to look. One way, as Danielle alluded to, is you look for where the birds are. So if there are birds around, these are cormorants, they're there, especially in the winter because there's fish around. So they can help guide you in thinking, I should go look in that place and see if there are fish there at night. But the real thing that comes in the most handy are these things. So maps. This is just, historic topo. Historic maps are great because they tend to show more things, more streams, more labeled things. You look at a map and you say, okay, Danielle said these fish were at the head of tide. What does that mean? So you pick out a stream, you have ocean, these bigger blue areas, and these little blue lines coming down. Where those streams come together is roughly head of tide. Now, to confirm in real life that you're actually at the head of tide, so the place where tide stops coming when it comes in, go down to the river or these little streams at high tide. If you can put a foot in fresh water and a foot in salt water, you're probably at the head of tide if it's high tide when you go there. These fish aren't going to just be ahead of tide. They may be in the area between high and low tide. They may be in the area above tide. But to orient yourself, use a map, find where these streams and oceans and bays come together, and go and ground truth it during the day. See what's there, see if there are birds, and also get a sense of the area you might want to go explore at night in the daytime. It makes life a little easier. But really, what you'll also see on this map are names. And you'll find this on a lot of old maps. And this one doesn't have any blaring giveaways, but you'll find maps that have names like Smelt Brook, potentially, or there's some older areas that have traditional names. Downeast, there's a place that if you look up the Passamaquoddy name for it, it's called Place You Go to Spear Tomcod. So there are cues in our landscapes that are transcribed by maps that can help you sort of sort out where you should go. But really, the big thing is, where's a stream, and a small stream, mostly because it's easier for you to see. Where do these small streams meet the ocean? Go check them out. Finding out if they're public makes it easier. Public properties makes your life a little bit easier to access. If it's private, maybe knock on the door of a landowner and ask them, like, hey, can I come look at your stream tomorrow night to look for Tomcod? I'm doing a survey. Don't knowingly walk through someone's yard at night and scare them because you're trying to find Tomcod. Doesn't help the survey. The big thing also I'll point out on this map, Flanders Stream is kind of big. It's off to the right here. It's a larger stream. You could go there, see birds, and say, there's probably Tomcod there, but the stream's awfully big down near head of tide. But there are different streams nearby. There's one to the left and one to the right, to the east and west. Those are smaller. Maybe go to those, because if you've seen birds in the bigger stream but can't really see fish, maybe the smaller streams are going to yield easier access to an area of river you can see better. And really, when you pick out a location based on, looking at a map, talking to people locally, watching the birds, what are you actually looking for? And this is fish in the water. You can kind of see from above with the light on. When they're there, they're there. So they're these gray things wiggling around. And what they look like are like this. They're sitting on the bottom. They're hiding behind the rocks. Like Danielle said, they're cryptic. See, their faces are hiding. They often think they're hiding from you if they can't see you. So a lot of times, if you surprise them, they'll stick their head on a rock and you can still see them. That's how you count them. That's how you assess how many might be there. But you'll see, when you find them, you find them. They're not, they don't disappear, and they look like tomcod. They look like fish. And you're not going to see many other things out in these brooks in these areas this time of year. So that's ultimately what we're looking for. This guy right here. Guide yourself by talking to people about where they've heard they are or they've seen them in the past. What are you seeing during the day for bird activity, and what are maps and research doing to sort of guide you to locations that look promising based on the fact that they are these freshwater and saltwater mixing spots.
Okay, I guess that's me. Hi, everybody. I'm Riley Young-Morse with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and I am going to introduce you to the platform that, let's see, hold on, I can't talk and switch screens here. The platform that we recently launched this last year, the Ecosystem Investigation Network. And if you're familiar with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and I think I'm sharing the wrong screen, so hold on a minute. There's always somebody in the group.
I'll just remind people while you pull up the right screen, Riley, that we are getting some great questions in the Q&A feature. So if you have questions as we wrap up the presentation here, please make sure that you're typing those in so that we can answer those at the end.
I'm sorry, it's just giving me this weird feedback that it's not sharing. Okay, let's try this. Okay, so the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and we this last year launched our platform, the Ecosystem Investigation Network. And if you're familiar with GMRI, and perhaps you have some school-aged children, we've had a citizen science program for more than a decade called Vital Signs. And Vital Signs was primarily focused around mapping and locating invasive species, and the protocol was designed for teachers to work with groups of students. And throughout that effort, we always had interest in trying to create more opportunities for the general public, and the general public who was interested in some of the questions and research that was going on in the Gulf of Maine. So we basically went through sort of an evolution of Vital Signs and developed this platform, and it's built to service both kind of our origin story, which is our classroom and teacher model, but also to provide an opportunity for citizens to get involved. And so we sought projects that kind of all knit together into essentially a family of projects that were looking at climate impact and changes in the Gulf of Maine and the bioregion. So what we've got is sort of a collection of projects, and I will, let's see, what did I do? Okay, so I had it all planned out, make sure I can follow my plan. So investigate.gmri.org is our URL, pretty easy to remember. And when you get there, you're going to want to view the projects. And so you can see we've got a host of things available. Our latest one is Finding Frostfish, which, as you saw from everybody's talks previously, you can recognize by this sort of similar photo that we're using. And so this is the project page where you're going to do all of your research and understand a little bit more about the project itself. So we've pulled together a great backstory of information about frostfish to keep you busy. You can click in and see the partners that are working on the projects. And then we have a lot more information around the protocol, and Danielle walked you through this very specific protocol. There's a little more information here. Again, kind of advising you to be very cautious and know where you're going and be prepared. And then once you've sort of familiarized and access your data sheet, which is available through this link along with some of the identification resources, we're just going to step you through creating an account and then showing you a little bit of the difference between getting your data into the system from the data sheet you've collected in the field. And that's primarily for making sure you have a backup of your data so that you're not relying on a electronic device in a area that has sketchy internet or cell service. You want to make sure that you're collecting your data, and then you've got this tool to help get it to us in sort of a digitized way. So it's a pretty straightforward form, but we do want you to collect the data first. Okay, so up here in the corner, you're going to see a login button, and live demos are the bane of all our existence. So I'm just going to step you through what should happen. And so if you've already got an account, if you've maybe helped us with the smelt survey last spring, or you've done some other things, you're just simply going to log in. Click this again, you're going to see a register. And so we're going to ask you for your username and email, and they need to be, actually, it's just your email twice. So you'll get notified if you do that, but enter your email, set a password, and create your account. And if you do have any trouble with this, down here at the bottom is a email where you can reach out, and we will sort of assess what's going on. But it's pretty straightforward registration, and it gets you right into the system. Okay, and then I think I have to do this again because I also am already logged in Firefox, and it wasn't letting me show you that. Okay, so we're back to the platform, but now we're logged in, and I just wanted to show you a few more details. So again, you sort of navigated your way. You can go in through this way too. And we invite you to come check out some of the other projects as well if you're interested. So we're going to navigate to the Frostfish project. And then these tabs, I showed you the first two, where you're sort of seeing the overview of the project, and then the tab that's going to give you some of the background and the protocol. Now we're going to look at how to contribute data. So the first thing we're going to do, and this might be a little bit different than some other platforms you've worked on, and this has to do with how the site is structured to handle some complicated classroom multiple data sheet projects that we have on here. But we'd like you to tell us where you're going and when you're going first. And so that's sort of, you're setting up your location and the date of your study. If you've collected your coordinate data from your device, you can simply enter it in here. If you want to live on the edge, you can have it find you. Oops, now you all know where I live. Let me just zoom out here. And then you're going to put a marker, which is this little guy right here. So now you're going to, actually, it's not letting me do this. This is why you don't do live demos. We would set a marker, and it would tell us where we're going. From there, so assume I have just entered, let's add some data. It's going to take us to what should be very familiar to you after Danielle's demo, which is the data sheet. And so again, it looks a little bit different, and that's just simply data entry versus, this lovely PDF that we have some control over. So what's important to notice are these red asterisks. Those are the required fields. And this survey does have a lot of required fields because they're really trying to get a sense of all these questions are important or they wouldn't be here. So if you have the answer, you have as best as you can answer it, or you can, in some cases, it'll give you an option of saying, I don't have that information or unknown. So pay careful attention to the asterisks and be sure to answer that. So this is just some demo data that I set up, doing some testing. Again, we're going to ask you for the stream name of the county. If you know public-private status of the land, ease of access, any of the obstructions. Again, these are important. So they're all, it's either yes, no, or, it'll give you an error message. So the two options, as we spent some time thinking about whether there should be two different protocols or just one protocol with an option to tell us about your nighttime or your daytime observations. And we ultimately settled on kind of one protocol for everything. So you're either going to give us a number of Tomcod, or you're going to say that you didn't survey at night, and then you're going to give us the information on any birds that you saw. And so that's as simple as, incrementing the counter and then noting whether they were doing one of the behaviors that Danielle mentioned. In terms of photos, there's one required photo, which is your stream or river, but encouraging you to enter kind of your best photo of any birds or tomcod that you saw. And field notes, this is a wide open text field for you to enter all the information, any kind of specific notes on any of the questions that the protocol kind of guided you to do, whether that was fishing behavior or specifics around a bird or whatever. These will all come through when the data sheet is submitted, and you can, Danielle and Molly can follow up with you and Brett if there's questions about some of your notes. So then again, we ask you to sort of certify that you did this. So it's really just a repeat of the paper data sheet, but just in digital form. When you've submitted your data, we are making some of the data, some of the information available to the general public who come through the site and look at the view data tab, but not all. And in some of our other projects, you can sort of open up an observation and see a lot more detail because of the nature of the study and kind of making sure private information or locations aren't thoroughly shared. It's a pretty simple glimpse of, you know, when, where, and what was going on. And so again, this is just test data, but this will increment with your observations soon and start to show us a lot of activity on the project. And I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Riley. That was great.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so in essence, the online platform is just a way to copy over the data that you've collected in the field on your paper data sheet and submit it so that we'll be able to go in and pull all of the data from the season as we go. So we have some great questions in the chat, or sorry, in the Q&A. I'd love it, Danielle and Brett, if you turn your videos back on as we answer some of these questions. Just a reminder for folks that we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this training, and we'll include the links from tonight's presentation, and we'll also include any of the safety data protocol sheets that you need as a refresher. And as always, we're available. Our contact information is actually on that Ecosystem Investigation Network site. And we're also available via email if you have questions after the presentation tonight about signing up to do the surveys. So there's Brett. A couple questions from the chat. First of all, we had a really great suggestion, and I'm realizing that these are things that get lost in translation when you're not doing trainings in person. Great suggestion to use headlamps and carry backup flashlights, also using a wooden walking staff as you're nearing these frozen icy stream banks. So thanks for that suggestion, Christopher. A question from Sarah for you, Brett. You mentioned the Passamaquoddy name for tomcod. Can you repeat that?
I won't try to say it, but what I can do is I will
put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'll forward it along. It's actually in a book though, so I have to, you know, type it from a book first.
Okay, great.
But I'll send it along. And then also if you go to the Passamaquoddy tribe at Sapayak Point, they have an environmental department website. So it's the Passamaquoddy Sapayak Environmental Department. And they have a lot of good resources around fishes, including tomcod. They sort of talk about them and some of their resources. And we'll send that link around too when we do our we have some follow-up materials.
Excellent. Moving on, would tomcod be in creeks?
Yeah, so I know that with the condensed time of our talk here, where we're saying to go is basically if it's fresh water flowing into salt water, if you can, even if it's only wide enough for you to straddle it, there might be a tomcod there. You should look if you have access to that body of water. So little creeks, ditches that have culverts in them. I mean, whatever, tiny, the thing in your driveway that flows down into salt water, as long as it's sort of adjacent to salt water and pretty close, you know, it can't be, you know, up a 50-foot waterfall from the ocean. But yeah, little things, big rivers, creeks little things are easier to look at anyway. So.
Awesome. There's a question here for Aaron, from Aaron. Can we survey larger streams or rivers for birds, even if we wouldn't necessarily be able to survey them for fish? That's a great question. Danielle, do you have an answer to that one?
Depends on what size of a river we're talking about. I would say something like the Kentuskeg that flows into the Penobscot does have tomcod in it, and is certainly a lot larger than some of the smaller coastal streams that I think of from mid-coast Maine. So that might be one where you may be effectively able to survey for birds, but less effectively able to survey for tomcod. So any of those tributaries along the Penobscot in Bangor, Brewers, like Sajunkadunk Stream, I think anything below Milford Dam would be a good place to go. And then Brett, maybe do you have any additional insight on size on the upper range for size to look for?
No,
for
because
birds?
I mean, you can go sit at the Penobscot, right? You can, if it's, people catch these fish a lot in the Kennebec, ice fishing for smelt in the winter, in the middle of the Kennebec. So big water, you can find them. I mean, again, if it's salt and fresh mixing, that's the zone they're coming to spawn. So that can happen in a tiny thing, a tiny little river, or a huge one.
Great.
Someone also asked about dates, Molly. I'll just touch, because that's a pretty important one. So dates to go look for these fish. Downeast, the Christmas time is like literally Christmas night for a lot of people, is the night you go look for tomcod. But further down east towards the Cobscook Bay area, it's a little later, closer to New Year. But they're starting to show up now. You'll see birds feeding as early as now and into mid-January. So, you know, picture a peak that happens around the solstice and New Year's, and then a bell curve approaching that from each side. So you'll start to see stuff now, and you might find we haven't looked in your stream, so maybe yours come earlier.
There is a question about interest in collecting tomcod if found to provide biological samples, odorless stomachs. We're not encouraging folks to do that at this time. Really, what this survey allows us to do is identify places where tomcod are, and perhaps invest in further monitoring and sampling of the fish. So we're asking you to stick pretty strictly to the data protocols and just collect observations for us. Great question.
There is some work being done on eDNA around these fish, so people are, you know, very specific. Scientists have collected pieces of tomcod to look at isolating their DNA, so you can sort of scoop the water and see if they've been there. You may have heard of this in the news around other fish species, but that's not something we're doing. But that is happening. If you're interested, you can always reach out directly and we can connect you to the lab that's doing that work.
All right, let's see. There's a lot of really great questions, and I would also just offer, we have a few more minutes remaining in our time. If we don't get to your question and it's still burning in your mind over the next couple of days, please feel free to send us an email. And especially as you get started on the survey, we want you to reach out with questions that you have so that we can help ensure that you're collecting data in the right way. So there's a couple of questions here about substrate and what substrate do tomcod or frostfish prefer?
Do you remember those videos and those pictures? They're in the cobbly, rocky, gravelly stuff. And that's when they're spawning, because that's what they're trying to spawn in. So, you know, they'll live in the salt marshes and the near shore, the other parts of their life. But for this survey, we're looking for spawners, and they want to find that cobbly, gravelly, rocky bottom, like we saw in those videos.
There's another good question about, Louise says, do we monitor one site many times or a different site each time?
That's a great question. We'd love you to go back to the same site over the span of a few weeks. So Brett talked about kind of the bell bell-shaped curve there. So if you're going back, we'd love for you to go back to the same site, maybe over 3 or 4 weeks. And if you have time to do more than one site, we'd love that as well. Some of these, especially the smaller coastal streams, are close enough that you could do a couple of them in the span of an hour.
And in a similar vein, how many visits per stream or site are expected or ideal? Obviously, the more the merrier, but I would say if you could get out more than once, that would be great to the same site, but I'll let others chime in.
Yeah, probably more than once, even if you find them, because you might, one night of heavy spawning is good data, but you might find that there's 10 nights, or you might find that you see one fish and think it's light spawning, but if you came back 2 days later, there might be 100 times that. So if you can go more, go. I mean, what else are you doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. The more you can go, you know, we're happy to have you go as many times as you want to go, to be honest. And ideally, I'd say, you know, at a minimum, if you can go to a site 3 times, that would be perfect. I mean, that gives us a little bit more of a sense of a pattern. Once, we can't say much. Twice, we can say maybe a little more, but 3 times gives us a chance to see if there's some kind of a pattern. But again, there are a lot of streams out there, and the more data we can have collected, the better we'll know our streams here in Maine and where tomcod are.
There's a question about, is there a way to coordinate with others from my area who might also be interested in doing this? Riley, I might ask you, because I know that there is sort of a chat sort of forum function within the platform. I wonder if that might be a good way for folks to connect.
Yeah, that could be, just sort of once people are getting registered and getting active in the project, then we can look into that. I don't know, it's not something that's probably going to be useful right now. So I think it's certainly something we should, we can look into.
Yeah, and we can certainly help facilitate that as best we can as people are getting signed on and as we understand what parts of the state you all are surveying in, we can certainly help facilitate. And there was a question in the list here about surveying solo if you're doing a bird survey only. How do we feel about that?
I think that if you're comfortable, if you know your stream, if you're comfortable, if you're someone who goes out and bird watches solo already, that would be fine. If it's a new excursion for you, we would prefer that you go with a partner for safety. I guess the key thing I'd say is if you are an experienced birder and you go solo most of the time and you take a partner once, have that partner be a silent partner the time they come out so that your data is consistent as one pair of eyes. But we really would prefer partners.
I just want to touch on, there's one question that's a really good one. These are all really good, but one that's very specific towards surveying about tidal cycle or lunar cycle. So the lunar cycle. What we didn't say is because this survey includes bird, daytime and nighttime, you can kind of look whenever. The birds are going to be around. But when you're looking for fish in the brook, these fish are coming up at night with high tide. So like, yes, there's a lunar influence in the sense that tides are driven by the moon, but these fish are coming up at night to spawn, even if they're nearby being fed on by birds during the day, you know, they're really coming in on those overnight high tides. So in the sense that the moon drives the tides, yeah, look for the best overnight tides between now and, you know, January 15th. That's going to be your best chances, right? And the closer to the solstice, the better. But it's with that high tide, you know, if you went out at night to look for tomcod at dead low tide and you're ahead of tide, you're not going to see tomcod. The tide's too far away. The fish aren't coming in then. They'll come with that salt water.
Great question. So we're actually at time. There were great questions coming in. Thank you all. We had a great turnout this evening. Over 60 people joined this call. Again, we'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the event. And if you know of others who would be interested in participating in the Tomcod survey or the frostfish survey, please send them our way and we can make sure that we get them a recording of this presentation and let them know how to sign up to volunteer to do the survey. Yeah, thanks to all of our presenters this evening, and we look forward to hearing from you and your experiences out in the field looking for frostfish. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.